Hey everyone. Perfect for when you need to shut off your brain and let someone whisper about the world's most disastrous royal romances until you forget what century it is. So, get comfortable. Dim the lights. Let your phone fall somewhere in the sheets. And drift with me back to a time when marriage wasn't about love, or compatibility, or even basic shared chromosomes. Tonight, we're unraveling the tangled bedsheets of Europe's royal families, those glittering dynasties that believed keeping power in the family also meant keeping the bloodline as, well, family-like as possible. Because if you think your cousin's wedding was awkward, imagine being legally required to marry yours. Let's take a slow breath here. The flicker of candlelight. The rustle of velvet. The quiet sound of a royal genealogist weeping into a family tree that looks suspiciously like a pretzel. You see, among the noble houses of medieval and early modern Europe, it wasn't just common to marry relatives, it was practically government policy. Royal marriages weren't about attraction or affection. They were about alliance. About borders, armies, and who got to own what piece of God's slightly overpopulated earth. And naturally, they made it worse. So tonight's story drifts through some of the most unfortunate unions ever sanctified by crown and cathedral. The matches that began with a treaty and ended with a genetic disaster. The ones that gave us jawlines so long they looked like architectural features. And heirs who were, quite literally, too fragile for the throne their parents fought so hard to keep pure. Let's start where all good royal catastrophes do, with Spain. The Habsburg experiment, keeping it in the family. The Habsburgs were Europe's great overachievers in the field of royal inbreeding. They didn't just marry cousins, they married their cousins' cousins, and sometimes recycled the same DNA so thoroughly it's a wonder they didn't start producing wax figures instead of children. By the 1500s, the Habsburgs had become the continent's most powerful dynasty, sprawling from Spain to Austria, with in-laws in nearly every court that mattered. They were rich, pious, and just a little too proud of their chin. Yes, that chin. The infamous Habsburg jaw. A genetic souvenir passed lovingly down the line until it reached its most tragic collector, Charles II of Spain. Charles II was difficult to describe politely. Let's just say, if you took every recessive gene in the family, put them in a hat, and picked them all, you'd get Charles. He was small, weak, drooled constantly, and spoke with such difficulty that foreign diplomats were genuinely unsure whether he understood human language. He was nicknamed El Hechizado, meaning the bewitched. Because of course he was. In 17th century Spain, when someone looked that unwell, they didn't think maybe we should stop marrying our nieces. They thought, witchcraft. Charles's parentage reads like a warning label. His father was Philip IV of Spain. His mother, Mariana of Austria. They were uncle and niece. Their parents were also first cousins. And their grandparents were, you guessed it, cousins. In fact, Charles had so few distinct ancestors that, genetically speaking, he was more inbred than the offspring of a brother-sister marriage. But none of this stopped him from being king. He inherited the Spanish throne in 1665, or at least, was placed on it, since he couldn't stand for long without help. Throughout his short, sickly life, the Spanish court clung to the delusion that divine will had produced him. When, in reality, it was divine indifference to their family planning. Charles tried to produce an heir, twice. Both of his marriages failed, in part because his body simply couldn't. When he died in 1700, aged 38 but looking closer to 80, he left behind no children, only a succession crisis and the ghostly echo of a jawline that could cut glass. Let's drift over to another royal family who made similar mistakes, but with a slightly different aesthetic, the Tudors. The Tudors were less genetically entangled but equally cursed in their marital endeavors. Henry VIII, in particular, made sure of that. But that's for our next quiet detour. Take a moment. Stretch. Breathe. Because the next marriage we're drifting into involves broken hearts, papal paperwork, and an entire country split in half, all because one man couldn't get a male heir. Let's drift now, to a damp English palace, echoing with the faint sound of quills scratching and courtiers whispering. It's the early 1500s. And King Henry VIII is lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering why God keeps giving him daughters. He wasn't short on wives, of course. Just short on sons. And if you've ever thought your relationships were complicated, remember, this man managed to make an international theological crisis out of his love life. Henry had been married to Catherine of Aragon, a Spanish princess, and incidentally, the aunt of that unfortunate Habsburg we just met, Charles II. So yes, we're still very much in the family. Catherine was kind, devout, and dignified. Unfortunately, she was also unable to give Henry the one thing he wanted most, a surviving male heir. She bore him several children, but only one lived past infancy, Mary. Henry, of course, wasn't thrilled. He convinced himself that the problem wasn't him. It was God punishing him for marrying his brother's widow. Because Catherine had previously been married to Henry's older brother, Arthur. Arthur had died young, before the marriage was ever truly consummated, depending on whose version you believed. But in Henry's mind, this was the divine loophole. He argued that the marriage was cursed from the start. And naturally, he wanted an annulment. Unfortunately, annulments weren't like casual text breakups. They required approval from the Pope. And the Pope, Clement VII, was, at the time, effectively being held hostage by Catherine's nephew, Emperor Charles V. Yes, that Charles. The one whose family tree was already more vine than tree. So, the Pope politely told Henry, absolutely not. And Henry, being Henry, decided to do what any reasonable monarch would do when denied a divorce by the leader of the church. He created his own church. The Church of England was born less out of religious conviction and more out of romantic frustration. Henry declared himself the new head of the church, annulled his own marriage, and married in Boleyn. The world tilted slightly. And Europe watched as one man's midlife crisis turned into a centuries-long schism. And, unfortunately, didn't fare much better. She too failed to produce a son. She did, however, give birth to Elizabeth, who would later become one of England's greatest monarchs. But Henry wasn't exactly a play-the-long-game type. When Anne's charm faded, or rather, when her inability to bear sons became inconvenient, Henry accused her of adultery, treason, and witchcraft. And had her executed. Because, of course, he did. Henry then married Jane Seymour, who finally gave him a legitimate son, Edward VI. But Jane died soon after childbirth. Henry mourned briefly, then got remarried. And remarried again. And again. And again. 6 wives in total. 2 divorced, 2 beheaded, 1 died, 1 survived. Like a grim nursery rhyme sung quietly over the sound of distant church bells. By the end of his reign, Henry had managed to break with Rome, bankrupt his treasury, and ensure his 3 surviving children would all rule in turn, each undoing what the last had done. It's almost poetic if you ignore all the decapitations. But Henry's story, for all its noise, was just one thread in Europe's greater tapestry of royal dysfunction. Let's leave the smell of ink and roast mutton behind for now. Let's drift further east, across the cobblestone bridges of Vienna, and into the palaces of Austria. There, another Habsburg, with a far more delicate problem, waits for us. By the 1700s, the Habsburg family had been inbreeding for nearly 300 years. They had perfected it into an art form. And standing proudly at the center of this elaborate family lattice was Empress Maria Theresa. She was clever, formidable, and astonishingly prolific. In between running an empire, she somehow found time to have 16 children. Which is roughly 1 child every other year for 3 decades. Her husband, Francis I, was both her cousin and her business partner. Together, they produced a generation of offspring who were, genetically speaking, their own second cousins. Among them was Marie Antoinette, the ill-fated Queen of France. But we'll get to her soon enough. Maria Theresa believed in controlling her children's lives with the same precision she used to manage her empire. Every marriage was a tool of diplomacy. She didn't marry them for love, she married them for treaties. If a prince or princess could strengthen the Habsburg grip on Europe, into the carriage they went. It worked politically. Genetically? Less so. By the late 1700s, several Habsburg descendants were suffering from the same signature features. That pronounced jaw, elongated nose, and, in many cases, infertility. They had, in their pursuit of royal purity, effectively engineered their own decline. But let's drift gently onward. From Austria to France. From the sharp marble halls of Vienna to the gilded, echoing chambers of Versailles. Where a young queen, Maria Theresa's daughter, was about to become history's favorite scapegoat. Marie Antoinette didn't ask for any of this. At 14, she was shipped from Vienna to France to marry the heir to the throne, Louis Auguste, who would later become Louis XVI. She crossed the border in tears, stripped of all her Austrian belongings, even her clothes, because, naturally, France didn't want any foreign fabric contaminating its royal heir. The marriage was meant to seal peace between France and Austria. Instead, it sealed two teenagers into a lifelong political tragedy. Louis was shy, awkward, and deeply uninterested in romance. Marie was bright, sociable, and very much alone. For years, the marriage remained unconsummated, which in royal terms meant that diplomats were writing anxious letters about what two teenagers were not doing in bed. Eventually, after much discussion, persuasion, and probably diagramming, the problem was resolved. They had children. But by then, France had turned against her. Marie Antoinette became the symbol of everything the public hated about the monarchy. Foreign, extravagant, out of touch. The phrase "let them eat cake," which she never actually said, became shorthand for royal ignorance. Her downfall wasn't genetic, like the Habsburgs before her. It was cultural. But her bloodline, heavy with inbreeding and entitlement, made her the perfect target for a revolution that was already coming. And when it came, it was not kind. She met the guillotine in 1793. Graceful to the end, reportedly apologizing to her executioner for stepping on his foot. It was, in its way, a perfect metaphor, a woman born into too much history, apologizing for something she couldn't control. Now, let's turn the page gently. From powdered wigs and cake rumors to the icy palaces of Russia. Because the Romanovs had their own curse, one hidden in their blood. The Russian Empire was enormous. Frozen at the edges, gilded at the center. A land where peasants plowed frostbitten fields while the Tsar's court shimmered beneath chandeliers taller than trees. And in the early 1900s, that court belonged to Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their beautiful, fragile son, Alexei. From a distance, the Romanovs looked like the perfect royal family. Photographed often, always in soft light, a young father with a tired smile, a mother in pearls, daughters in matching gowns. They were modern, pious, and devoted to one another. But beneath the polished surface, a secret bled quietly through their bloodline. It began, oddly enough, in England. The genetic curse of hemophilia traced back to Queen Victoria, who unknowingly passed it to several of her descendants. It would ripple outward through the royal families of Europe, a quiet, invisible disaster disguised as nobility. Alexandra, Nicholas's wife, was one of Victoria's granddaughters. And with her came the gene. Their son, Alexei, inherited it. Hemophilia is cruel. A tiny cut could lead to hours of bleeding. A bruise could swell into agony. And in the days before transfusions or modern medicine, it was often a death sentence disguised as childhood. The Romanovs guarded the secret desperately. In a world that worshipped strength and divine favor, having a weak heir was unthinkable. If the Tsarevich was frail, then perhaps, people whispered, God no longer blessed the family. So Alexandra turned to prayer. And when prayer didn't work fast enough, she turned to Rasputin. Now, Rasputin's story is one of those historical tales that feels almost too strange to be real. A wandering Siberian mystic with questionable hygiene, impressive eyes, and an even more impressive reputation for miracles. He claimed to speak with God, heal the sick, and guide the lost. And somehow, improbably, he managed to convince a desperate empress that he could heal her son. To her astonishment, sometimes he actually did. When Alexei suffered from terrifying bleeding episodes, Rasputin would appear, pray, and calm both mother and child. And somehow, the boy would improve. Modern historians suggest Rasputin's calming presence, and his insistence that doctors stop giving Alexei aspirin, likely saved him from worse bleeding. But to Alexandra, it was divine proof. Rasputin became indispensable. To her, he wasn't a scandal, he was salvation. To everyone else, however, he was a national embarrassment. He drank, he boasted, he offended polite society simply by existing. Rumors painted him as a hypnotist, a womanizer, even a devil. And the more Alexandra defended him, the more the public despised her. Soon, people began whispering that Rasputin was the true ruler of Russia, that he controlled the royal family through the boy's illness. And in a way, he did. Because as long as Alexei's life hung in the balance, Rasputin's hold remained unbreakable. When war came in 1914, it swept through Russia like fire through dry grass. Nicholas took command of the army, leaving Alexandra and Rasputin behind in the capital. And as soldiers froze and starved at the front, the empire began to crumble from within. It was a strange, painful irony, the most powerful monarchy in the world undone not by war, or rebellion, or politics, but by one tiny, fragile gene. The royal family hid in their palaces, praying for recovery, while the streets filled with hunger and rage. By 1917, the people had had enough. The revolution arrived not as thunder, but as exhaustion. Nicholas abdicated. The Romanovs were placed under arrest. And Rasputin, who had predicted his own murder, was shot, stabbed, poisoned, and finally thrown into a river, a death so melodramatic it could only have belonged to him. The royal family's end came quietly. Exiled to Siberia, they spent their last months in a small, cold house surrounded by guards. They wrote letters, played games, tried to keep life feeling normal, even as the world outside decided they were no longer necessary. Then one night, in July 1918, they were led to a basement and executed. Their dynasty, 300 years of divine right and glittering splendor, ended in a few brutal minutes. The boy with the fragile blood, his mother who prayed for miracles, his sisters who sang softly in candlelight, all gone. The empire itself followed soon after. And so, the Romanov curse wasn't just a medical condition. It was a metaphor for power that refused to adapt, for rulers who mistook isolation for safety, for families so consumed by lineage that they forgot to live outside of it. Their portraits still survive. Calm, delicate faces gazing from another world. It's strange how peaceful they look, knowing what we know now. Let's take a breath. The candles are nearly out. The music, softer now, fades behind the snow and the silence of the steppe. But before we drift fully to sleep, there's one more story to visit. One final generation of royals, their faces smiling through early photography, their names still familiar, their bloodlines still tangled. Let's wander back toward the west. To the last era before monarchy turned into pageantry. By the time the 20th century drew its heavy curtains over Europe, the great monarchies had mostly collapsed, retreated, or politely reinvented themselves. Crowns became symbols, not power. Castles turned into tourist attractions. And royal scandals? They simply became news items, less like tragedies, more like entertainment. But beneath the polished smiles and balcony waves, those same old problems lingered. Fragile bloodlines. Rigid traditions. And that endless, exhausting question, what happens when a family built for the 13th century has to survive in the 21st? Let's start in Britain. Because of course, Britain never quite let go. Queen Victoria's descendants had once ruled half the world, and married into almost every European throne. By the time her great-great-granddaughter Elizabeth II ascended, the world had changed completely. Empires had vanished. The aristocracy was fading. And yet, somehow, the crown remained. Elizabeth's reign, calm, stoic, often inscrutable, became a kind of national lullaby. Decades of quiet endurance, wrapped in pastel suits and pearls. She never said too much, never revealed too much. In a way, she survived precisely because she didn't evolve. Still, the world around her couldn't help but notice that the same old royal fragility was creeping back in, not through blood this time, but through emotion. The House of Windsor, despite its polished exterior, was as dysfunctional as any medieval court, only now it came with paparazzi. Charles and Diana. Even now, the names feel like shorthand for everything beautiful and broken about modern royalty. He was born into duty, trained from birth to maintain composure. She was young, luminous, and unprepared for the loneliness that comes with being watched by millions. Their marriage, like so many before it, looked perfect at first. And then it didn't. There were tears behind palace walls, affairs whispered about in tabloids, and the slow disintegration of a fairy tale that was never quite real to begin with. When Diana finally stepped out of the royal shadow, walking through minefields, speaking to the press, hugging children with AIDS, she became something the monarchy couldn't quite process: human. And in the end, her humanity cost her everything. The world mourned, the palace retreated, and history quietly repeated itself. Another royal life shaped by isolation and image, unraveling in plain sight. Meanwhile, other monarchies across Europe were performing the same slow dance, part history, part theater. In Spain, the Bourbon dynasty resurfaced after decades of exile, only to face its own scandals, affairs, finances, a hunting trip that went very wrong. In Sweden, the royals became surprisingly relatable, cycling through public divorces and reality TV-level gossip. Even the Norwegian and Dutch monarchs learned to smile on cue while quietly wishing they could just take a nap like the rest of us. Royalty, it seems, was evolving into something stranger than fiction, ceremonial humans trapped in a loop of tradition and media. And yet, there's still a strange fascination. People line up outside palaces. They wave little flags. They watch weddings and funerals as if they're episodes in a long, slow-moving drama. Why? Maybe it's nostalgia, a yearning for the days when power was tangible, when people believed in the divine right of crowns. Or maybe, deep down, it's something simpler. We like our stories neat, with castles and titles and family drama that isn't ours. The same way we like lullabies, familiar, rhythmic, slightly tragic, and safe to fall asleep to. But let's pause there, for a moment. Because even as we drift among modern monarchs, the echoes of the past still hum faintly in the background. The genetic curses. The arranged marriages. The portraits painted to hide the pain beneath powdered smiles. From Habsburg jaws to Romanov bloodlines to Windsor heartbreak, it's all part of the same long, tired story of people born to rule, but never taught to live. And maybe that's the point. History doesn't really move forward, it drifts. Like candle smoke. Like the slow turn of an ancient globe. Different faces, same mistakes, all fading into the quiet. So, if your eyes are heavy now, that's alright. That's what this story was meant for. We've wandered through centuries of royal drama and dysfunction, but in the end, it's all just humanity in heavy clothing. Fragile, proud, and perpetually in need of a nap. The music fades now, soft, a little melancholic. You can imagine the last candle burning low in some forgotten palace corridor. And outside, the world keeps turning, indifferent to crowns, titles, and pedigrees. So, for tonight, let it go. Let the history blur at the edges. And rest, knowing that even the kings and queens couldn't escape exhaustion either. Hey everyone. This adult bedtime story works whether you're into sleep meditation, or just desperate for some decent rest. Either way, settle in. Dim the lights. Maybe put your phone somewhere safe under the pillow. And let's drift slowly, back through time, to the world of royal crowns, velvet halls, and family trees that should have come with warning labels. Tonight, we're looking at European history's royal marriages that went horribly, genetically wrong. The ones that produced children with strange features, dynasties collapsing under their own ambition, and, occasionally, adults who were a little too fragile for the throne they inherited. Because if you think your cousin's wedding was awkward, imagine being legally required to marry yours. And your cousin's cousin. And possibly, your second cousin, twice removed. Take a deep breath. Feel the weight of centuries pressing softly against your eyelids. The air smells faintly of candle wax and old parchment. There is no hurry. There is no urgency. Only the quiet unfolding of human folly, slowly, like smoke curling from a hearth. The Habsburgs, masters of the inbreeding experiment. Let's drift first to Austria, to the House of Habsburg, rulers so devoted to keeping power in the family that they may have overdone it slightly. By the 1500s, the Habsburgs had married cousins, nieces, and occasionally cousins of nieces. Their motto might as well have been, why diversify when you can recycle the same DNA? They were politically brilliant, of course. They ruled vast swaths of Europe. But the results of their family planning were mixed. The most famous outcome? Charles II of Spain, sometimes called El Hechizado, the Bewitched. Charles was small, frail, and chronically unwell. He spoke with difficulty. He drooled. His jaw was so pronounced that portraits almost resemble a wax sculpture. The cause wasn't witchcraft. It was centuries of intermarriage. Charles's parents were uncle and niece. His grandparents were cousins. The Habsburg family tree was less of a tree and more of a tightly wound braid of identical leaves. And yet, he became king. He attempted to produce an heir twice and failed. He died at 38, leaving behind no children, only a crisis of succession. Let's drift softly over to England, to meet a man whose marital life would change the course of a nation, Henry VIII. Henry's obsession with producing a male heir led to 6 marriages, 2 divorces, 2 executions, 1 widow, and 1 wife who survived him. He created the Church of England so he could marry Anne Boleyn, and gave birth to Elizabeth, later, a remarkable queen, and then she was executed. This is history told gently, the marriages of kings, fraught with obsession, policy, and occasionally, decapitation. From Habsburg jaws to Tudor scandals, we see a pattern: power, obsession, and the strange ways that families maintain control. And as we drift from palace to palace, country to country, it becomes clear that European royalty shared more than just crowns. They shared eccentricities, fragility, and an almost religious commitment to keeping power and bloodlines pure. Take a slow breath. Feel the quiet of the past. These were people like you and me, only with crowns, castles, and slightly more tragic expectations. Now, let's travel to England, early 1500s. The palace corridors are quiet, except for the soft echo of footsteps and the occasional rustle of velvet. And there lies Henry VIII, king, husband, and future creator of the Church of England, staring at the ceiling, contemplating the one thing he truly desires: a son. Henry had married Catherine of Aragon, widow of his late brother. She was Spanish, pious, and mostly patient. She bore him several children, but only Mary survived infancy. Henry, of course, found this unsatisfactory. He blamed God. He blamed Catherine. He blamed, probably the royal astrologer, if anyone had been available. The problem, he insisted, was the divine punishment for marrying his brother's widow. Henry requested an annulment. The Pope, Clement VII, refused. Political reasons: Catherine's nephew was Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, and naturally, the Pope didn't want to upset him. So Henry did what any king with infinite patience and very little moral restraint would do: he created his own church. The Church of England emerged, less out of theology than frustration, and Henry promptly annulled his marriage himself. Then he married Anne Boleyn, a young woman rumored to be clever, charming, and slightly impatient herself. She gave birth to Elizabeth, later one of England's most famous monarchs. Anne's story ended as many had, executed for alleged adultery, treason, and witchcraft, because, naturally, the king decided it was the best solution. Henry continued: Jane Seymour, who bore him Edward VI and died soon after, Anne of Cleves, divorced politely, Catherine Howard, executed, and finally Catherine Parr, who survived. 6 wives, countless political consequences, and a royal succession shaped entirely by personal whims. Henry's marriages were not just about heirs. They were about power, alliances, and the curious human tendency to combine both personal desire and statecraft in ways that rarely end well. As we drift from the Tudor palaces, consider the patterns: fragile heirs, ambitious marriages, and families who treated unions like chess pieces. And that brings us, softly, back to Austria, where another dynasty perfected this idea over centuries: the Habsburgs. Now, imagine the grand halls of Vienna. Candles flicker against polished wood in golden frames. The air smells faintly of incense and old parchment. Here, a woman sits at the center of a sprawling dynasty, Empress Maria Theresa. She is intelligent, formidable, and astonishingly productive. 16 children, all married strategically to cousins, uncles, and distant relatives. Every union calculated to strengthen the empire, and every child a living treaty. Her husband, Francis I, is her cousin. Charming, dependable, and genetically compatible in a way that guarantees the Habsburg family line will remain, let's say, tightly interwoven. The Habsburgs had a talent for politics and an unfortunate talent for inbreeding. Over centuries, they perfected the art of marrying within the family. And Maria Theresa? She managed this with precision. Letters survive in which she scolds her daughters about their behavior, attire, and choice of conversation. She believed she could mold her children like clay, fitting them perfectly into Europe's diplomatic map. Among her 16 children is Maria Antonia, later known as Marie Antoinette. She is playful, scattered, and more interested in music and ribbons than politics. Her mother calls her troublesome. By the age of 14, she is betrothed to the French Dauphin, Louis Auguste. The marriage is diplomatic, not romantic, and it seals her fate as a symbol of Austria and France. Maria Theresa continues her meticulous oversight from Vienna, while her daughter steps into Versailles, a gilded cage where charm and beauty must mask any personal desire. The lesson here is subtle. Power can be preserved by strategy, by letters, by marriages arranged with the precision of a mathematician. But the cost is personal. Childhood shaped by duty, lives defined by alliances, and hearts rarely allowed to wander freely. Take a slow breath. Let the candlelight flicker in your mind. These children, these dynasties, are distant now, but their patterns repeat: ambition, fragility, and the quiet, relentless weight of expectation. From Vienna, our story drifts to Versailles, where Marie Antoinette is about to learn the true price of royal life. Imagine the gilded halls of Versailles. Mirrors stretch endlessly. Candlelight multiplies in glass, turning the palace into a dream of soft, golden haze. Somewhere amid the echoing corridors, a 14-year-old girl from Vienna walks cautiously. This is Marie Antoinette, sent to France to marry the Dauphin, Louis Auguste. She is charming, playful, and utterly unprepared for the strict choreography of the French court. Every movement will be observed. Every word will be noted. She is Austrian, and that alone is enough to make her an outsider. Her husband is shy and awkward. Louis Auguste is more interested in locks and keys than politics or romance. For years, their marriage remains unconsummated. Meanwhile, Marie writes anxious letters to her mother, Empress Maria Theresa, seeking guidance. Her mother replies with the usual advice: be perfect, be patient, be graceful, be discreet. All simultaneously. When the marriage is finally consummated, it is treated like a minor miracle by diplomats and the press. Fireworks, feasts, and cautious celebrations follow. Marie bears children, but the court remains unforgiving. Marie becomes a symbol, not entirely by choice, of extravagance and excess. She hosts balls, commissions gowns, and even builds a small, fanciful village on the palace grounds where she can pretend to be a shepherdess. Outside the walls, France struggles with debt, hunger, and unrest. Rumors spread that the queen is frivolous and wasteful. The infamous phrase, "let them eat cake," though never actually spoken by her, becomes shorthand for royal indifference. Years pass. The revolution simmers. Marie tries to act with dignity. She attempts to guide her husband, protect her children, and navigate a crumbling monarchy. But history is indifferent. In October 1789, the royal family is forced to leave Versailles. They are escorted to Paris, under the watchful eyes of an angry public. Life as they knew it ends quietly, and then, with more urgency than comfort, the world outside closes in. Marie's life concludes at the guillotine in 1793. She steps onto the scaffold, cuts of hair falling gently, and apologizes to the executioner for stepping on his foot. Grace persists, even at the edge of history. Her story is a reflection of centuries of royal expectation, beauty, charm, and obedience demanded of those who can least choose for themselves. And as we drift from her life, softly, we begin to see a recurring motif: fragile heirs, powerful parents, and the invisible weight of ancestry. Next, we will travel further east, into the icy palaces of Russia, where a fragile boy and a mysterious mystic illuminate another kind of royal curse. The Russian Empire was vast, stretching over frozen plains, forests, and rivers that seemed endless. At its center stood Tsar Nicholas II, his wife Alexandra, and their fragile son, Alexei. On the surface, they were a perfect royal family, composed, photographed often, smiles carefully practiced. But beneath that polished exterior ran a quiet, invisible tragedy: hemophilia, inherited from Alexandra's grandmother, Queen Victoria. Alexei's condition was not immediately visible to the public, but it dictated almost every choice his parents made. A small cut could be fatal. Even a bruise might lead to hours of dangerous bleeding. In a world without modern medicine, the disease was terrifying. To save their son, Alexandra turned to Grigory Rasputin, a wandering Siberian mystic with an uncanny ability to calm the boy during episodes of bleeding. Rasputin's presence was controversial, to put it mildly. Nobles whispered about his habits, his influence, and his strange eyes. Yet for Alexandra, he was a lifeline. As Alexei's health fluctuated, Rasputin's power over the royal family grew. The Russian people, however, saw scandal, manipulation, and corruption. Whispers painted him as the secret ruler of Russia, controlling decisions through the boy's vulnerability. When World War I erupted, Nicholas left Alexandra and Rasputin in charge of the capital while he commanded the army. Russia's situation deteriorated. Soldiers froze, citizens starved, and the monarchy became increasingly isolated. By 1917, the revolution swept in. Nicholas abdicated. The Romanovs were exiled to Siberia. Rasputin had been murdered months earlier, poisoned, shot, and eventually thrown into a river, in a death almost theatrical in its absurdity. The Romanovs' final months were quiet. Letters, games, small routines. Then, in July 1918, in a basement, the family was executed. The dynasty ended. The Romanov curse was more than a genetic condition. It symbolized fragile bloodlines, isolation, and a royal family unable to adapt to the changing world. The photographs left behind, calm, delicate faces staring out from another century, seem almost serene in hindsight, even knowing the tragedy that would come. Let's drift now, away from icy palaces and execution basements, back toward Western Europe. Our final chapter examines modern royalty, the ceremonial kings and queens who inherited the weight of history, but not the actual power. By the 20th century, many of Europe's great monarchies had vanished or transformed. Crowns were now ceremonial, palaces more museum than fortress, and royal scandals were reported in newspapers rather than whispered in hallways. Yet the same old challenges lingered: fragile bloodlines, rigid traditions, and the endless expectation to perform. Royals were now under constant observation, not only by courtiers, but by cameras, journalists, and the public. Take Britain, for instance. The House of Windsor had survived 2 world wars, abdications, and the fading of empire. Elizabeth II ascended the throne with quiet determination. She did not speak loudly, she did not reveal much, and she endured. Her reign became a lullaby of continuity. But even in modern times, history repeats. Bloodlines remain important, emotion becomes news, and the lessons of the past quietly echo through palace walls. Then there was Charles and Diana. A marriage born of duty and public expectation, quickly complicated by personal incompatibility and intense scrutiny. Diana, young, compassionate, and independent, became the human face of the monarchy. Charles, reserved and cautious, struggled under centuries of protocol. Their story was not violent, as some royal histories have been, but its pain was no less real. Divorce, heartbreak, and public judgment unfolded in front of the world, a modern mirror of centuries-old royal dysfunction. Elsewhere in Europe, monarchies faced similar trials: Spain, Sweden, the Netherlands, all balancing tradition, duty, and public attention. The constraints of history remained, even as power itself became ceremonial. Yet fascination persisted. People lined the streets, watched weddings on television, and celebrated birthdays as if these events were crucial to the world. And perhaps they are, in a quiet, symbolic way. The lesson of modern royalty is subtle: traditions endure, patterns repeat, and even in a world of democracy and modernity, the echoes of fragile dynasties, arranged marriages, and inherited misfortune linger. History drifts, slow and steady, like smoke curling from a candle. The faces of kings and queens fade into photographs, portraits, and memory. And through it all, the patterns of ambition, duty, and fragility remain constant. As you settle further into rest, let your thoughts drift along these corridors of the past. The lights are dim. The halls are empty. The music of history plays softly, a rhythm designed to guide you into sleep. Next, we will conclude with a gentle reflection, a soft, calming outro to our journey through centuries of royal lives. Now, as we settle into the quiet of the night, let's drift slowly away from palaces, crowns, and the endless march of history. The candlelight dims. The halls grow empty. The voices of kings, queens, and courtiers fade into the soft hush of memory. We've wandered through the Habsburgs' tightly braided family trees. We've observed Henry VIII's relentless search for a son, and the Tudors' turbulent marriages. We've seen Marie Antoinette step delicately into Versailles, only to be shaped and blamed by centuries of expectation. We've felt the fragile weight of the Romanovs, their son's tiny bleeding wrists, and the mystic who could calm him. And finally, we've glanced at modern monarchs, performing age-old rituals under the watchful gaze of a modern world. History, in this sense, is gentle, or at least, it can be, if we allow it. It is the echo of lives lived with grandeur, mistakes, and ambition. It is a quiet reminder that even those who seem invincible were often fragile, human, and just as susceptible to exhaustion, error, and heartbreak as anyone else. So as you lie here, drifting, perhaps you imagine the soft rustle of gowns, the whisper of letters written long ago, the faint scent of wax and parchment. Let the weight of these stories settle like a gentle blanket. The dynasties rise and fall. The crowns tarnish. The bloodlines blur. And in the end, we are all just passing through time. Take one final slow breath. Let your eyelids grow heavy. Let your thoughts drift along corridors lined with history's quiet lessons. Allow yourself to sink fully into rest. And if you're still awake after all of this, that's perfectly fine. History will wait. Palaces will wait. The queens and kings we've met tonight will continue their eternal, silent duties. Sleep now, knowing that even the most powerful people in history eventually had to lie down and close their eyes. Good night.